FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Another day, I went out and I'd heard about this. I'd heard about a warehouse on the outskirts of Baghdad where a private security firm was protecting this huge warehouse that was used as a transit point for all the reconstruction material that was coming into Iraq. And so I went out there to kind of check it out and see what that was like. And when I got there, it was one of the strangest experiences I ever had in Iraq. I went out there with another private security company, and I got there, and the place was like a fortress. It was just huge blast walls and concertina wire that wrapped around this compound, and there were all these uniformed guards who looked like they were in the military, but you knew that they actually weren't. And the company that was providing the protection was called Falcon Group. It was a Kurdish company, and they hired former soldiers from the Peshmerga, which is the kind of notorious Kurdish militia. And so those guys had control of the perimeter, and it took forever just to get inside because the security was so tight. And I got inside the compound, and it was, it's hard to describe how remote it felt. It was even more remote than the green zone. You just felt like these people were completely isolated. And there were a few, expat American guys who lived there, and they had built this sort of forlorn-looking driving range where they would hit golf balls. And I always felt like it would have been like hitting golf balls off an oil platform. It was just like completely out in the wilderness. And they had this like little sorry fishing pond that they used, and they would, but it was just completely desolate. And then I asked to see the commander of this force that protected this compound, and I was led into this sort of remote building and down this corridor and into this room, and there was this guy who was like a former special forces officer in the military, and he was in his 60s, and he was very sort of grizzled, and he was chain smoking Marlboros, and he had a humidor on his desk, and a dog, like a Doberman, sitting underneath a desk, and he told me how sort of how he had gotten into it, and he said that he had gotten an email from a friend telling him that if he wanted to, he could make a lot of money, commanding a Kurdish force of some 500 guards. And so he sent an email back and said, sort of asking, what's the pay, and most importantly, how much power would he have as the private commander of this force? And the guy he knew sent back a one-sentence reply, and that reply was, scope of authority, God. Meaning like that he would be all-powerful. And what I realized, as I sort of went into this world, was that it was a world unto itself. There were no real rules that applied to these guys. L. Paul Bremer, the former head of the occupation government, the Coalition Provisional Authority, in 2004 had signed a law exempting private security contractors, all contractors, from the Iraqi criminal justice system. And yet, when you looked into, when you wondered sort of what law these guys would be covered by, it was never entirely clear whether they fell under the military criminal justice system or whether they fell under some civil law in the United States. And so by 2007, you had a situation in Iraq where literally 4 dozen soldiers or Marines had been prosecuted for murder in Iraq by the military. But not a single private security contractor had been charged with a crime. None. Even though you had an additional at least 20,000 people running around Iraq and essentially, fighting the war.